Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the 23rd Annual St. Paul Heritage Preservation Awards. I'm Doug Gassick. I'm the new Executive Director from the Preservation Alliance of Minnesota, and I'm really happy to be here tonight to celebrate all the great preservation work that's happening in St. Paul. When I came to take this role as the Executive Director, I decided to live in St. Paul because St. Paul, first of all, I love historic preservation, and St. Paul has some really great historic buildings that I could embrace. And I really love all the character of the buildings and the neighborhoods, especially the cool neighborhoods and the unique neighborhoods that all have a different sense of identity. And I'm happy to say that I settled in West 7th, which is my favorite neighborhood now, so I always have to put a plug for that. But I'm really excited to be here tonight to help recognize our city's outstanding architectural and cultural heritage, along with the people and projects that over the recent years have protected that heritage for future generations. I'm thrilled to see all the great work taking place here in St. Paul. So that being said, I'd like to introduce our friends at AIA St. Paul, as well as the St. Paul's Heritage Preservation Commission members for hosting this celebration. And I'd like to invite Nathan, the president of the St. Paul chapter of American Institute of Architects, and Rich, the chair of the St. Paul HPC, up to the podium.
Thank you, Doug, for those remarks. I am Nathan Johnson on behalf of AIA St. Paul, and we take great pride in being part of these awards for many, many years. Our members have participated in the jurying and selection of all the awards that have come about, and our members have actually participated in, obviously, the construction and the design of the buildings that are being awarded this evening. I'd just like to say that we have a great cache of architects in Minnesota and are committed to providing great architecture now and in the future.
And my name is Rich Laffin. I'm your HPC chair, and I also welcome you here this evening. I'm glad that you chose to attend this ceremony rather than going over to the NHL hockey game right down the street. I was just looking around the hall. I don't see Mayor Coleman anywhere. I think I know where he is tonight.
But this is more exciting.
I'll say. And you go for a twofer. You can start here and end up down the street. So, and again, I want to, there are a number of people I need to thank tonight, starting certainly with staff, Amy Spong, Christine Boulware, and Bill Dermody. They're great people, very hardworking, and they make our job up front as St. Paul Heritage Preservation Commissioners that much easier. And then, of course, they're always supported by interns. We have two tonight, Renee Cohn and Caroline Miller, who are the people behind the scenes. So thanks to them also. And now for the bigger thanks. I want to recognize our dear friend Judith Van Dyne, who served for many years at AIA Minnesota before her retirement just over a year ago in March of 2012. Judith was the smiling face at the front door of these preservation awards for more than 15 years, which is why we're honoring her tonight. Judith loves people. She's a creative person and has a delightful, sometimes wicked, sense of humor. She was the AIA Minnesota liaison, staff liaison for both the AIA St. Paul Board of Directors and also for the Minnesota design team for over 20 years, as well as an active member of the AIA Historic Resources Committee and the AIA St. Paul Book Club. That's how I remember her best. In those roles, Judith was great at engaging people, learning about their interests and their talents, and how she could best arrange for them to contribute. We wanted to salute her at this time last year, but she had already left town on an extended retirement road trip. So now that she's back, we finally get to thank her in public. Judith, please stand. Come forward. Isn't she a sweetheart? And tonight also gives us an opportunity to publicly thank our good friend, John Manning. John, will you join me up front? You have to stand up here for the whole 9 yards. John has been active in a variety of St. Paul community issues over the years, including as a former board member of the McAllister Groveland Community Council. His interest in historic preservation grew when he wrote about preservation issues as a reporter, and then when he volunteered with the Preservation Alliance of Minnesota. John was appointed to the St. Paul Heritage Preservation Commission in 2005 and served through January of this year, well beyond the typical 3-year commitment. He also served as co-chair of the city's Historic Preservation Plan Task Force in 2008, which is the first of its kind, and served on the working committee for the 2011 Historic Resources Survey for the West 7th, Payne, Phelan, and Frogtown neighborhoods. While with the HPC, John was a member of both the Education and Awards committees. But perhaps most importantly for HPC, he led as chair of this commission for 3 years. His tenure was marked by a solid grasp of preservation issues, networking with others, including people in this room, to advance preservation goals, and firm but fair leadership of our public hearing meetings. He was a great support for staff, available to talk with them through their ideas, and to help write and edit handouts and letters. So to thank you and remind you of our best wishes for you and your future plans. You've already received it. We have for you a print of an ink drawing by Dayton's Bluff artist Diane May. Thank you, John. Well done. Before introducing our first presenter, I'm going to break momentarily from the typical script in the program tonight to also recognize Melvin Carter, council member of Ward 1. Some of you may have seen some of the articles in the newspaper this morning. I've got one with me from the paper across town, announcing his appointment as director of the Center of Early Learning at the Department of Education. As the cliche goes, the state's gain will be our loss here in the city of St. Paul. Melvin and his assistants have stepped in and stepped up in the past year to support and assist HPC staff on several sensitive projects. The House of Hope, Summit Avenue Garden Fence Appeal, vacant houses at 451 Selby Avenue and 466 Eagleheart Avenue, and I know from having met with the neighbors how distressed they were, and recent failure of roof trusses for the pattern shop of the Jackson Street shops, which are the oldest surviving railroad buildings in the state of Minnesota. He handled each case with wisdom, creativity, and tact. He crafted compromise, and he most recently worked to locate grant and funding solutions to save a treasured railroad building. And for that, HPC staff and the commission would like to say simply thank you. And so with that, I invite you, Melvin, to come up and as our first presenter and begin the awards.
I really do. I didn't know that was coming, and I really appreciate that. My name is Melvin Carter, and I still represent Ward 1 in the St. Paul City Council. You know, I'm honored for which is Rich. As I came up, Rich just said small things go a long ways, and I think that's really important. You know, I got to be honest with you. When I first decided to run for city council, I was a 27-year-old guy, 26 something. I don't know. I don't even remember. I'm a lot older now. And as a 26-year-old guy, I honestly didn't run to like advance historic preservation, right? But what I didn't realize then was I was still young enough to think that you celebrate history for the past, you know, and I've learned that you celebrate history to make it clearer where you're going, you know, and there's a West African symbol called a Sankofa, and it's a bird that's moving forward while looking back, and it's intended to make that point that, you know, that when you understand your history, you can walk into your future a little more solidly, a little more confidently, a little more competently. and I'm honored today to present an award to an organization in our community, in the Ward 1 community, that I think reflects that really, really well, and that's Unity Church Unitarian. It's adjacent to the Hill Historic District. It's a 48,000 square foot facility at 733 Portland Avenue. It's comprised of multiple structures built over time. The original church dates to 1905, with a parish hall added in 1920, an education wing in 1956, and an enclosed cloister in 1963, and an expansion of the education wing in 1988. We've all got that uncle or aunt who did that with their own house, right? And you know how that ends up so many times, right? You know what it looks like, right? I don't have to go much further. You know what that can look like. It often leads to complicated building circulation and diminution of the original structure. And also, they were faced with a situation where the building needed some repairs. Unity Church Unitarian, which is a vibrant, community-oriented congregation, really found themselves at a crossroads. Would it be preferable to remain in the present location with all of the challenges that it required, or to seek out a new site altogether? The question led to numerous discussions and long-range visioning. Fortunately, in consultation with Miller Dunwoody Architecture, this great community asset organization decided to stay. Several sets of significant issues confronted the church. The cloister had closed off the original Portland Avenue entry, creating an exterior wall which was a real barrier, kind of a formidable barrier to the neighborhood, and conveyed really the wrong impression. Two, the labyrinth of corridors with multiple entry points and bottlenecks made movement from one part of the facility to the others difficult to navigate, and accessibility was a challenge. And third, because the church is committed to environmental sustainability, the work needed to reflect and support those values, including thermal, mechanical, and daylighting improvements. In reopening that corner, are we gonna get a picture? Okay, there we go. Isn't that incredible? So in reopening that corner of Portland and Grotto, the original church and parish hall have regained their former prominence, signaling a clear and inviting main entry. The courtyard metaphorically opens its arms to the community that the church seeks to serve, and the script says seeks to serve, but that the church very, very well serves. This is a church that is an important community organization and really understands that church doesn't just exist inside walls, right? But the whole point is to be welcoming to community, to be engaging community, not to build a fortress, but to do exactly what they've done aesthetically here. In reopening that corner, they've provided a park-like setting for conversation and contemplation, and also interior and exterior spaces are more naturally connected. What's more, they now have a master plan in hand for ongoing phased improvements. The congregation can now look to the future with confidence, even as needs, activities, and ministries evolve over time. And so I'm pleased to present to a community organization that in my history as a city council member has been a valued community asset, one that really understands the importance of placemaking, not just to celebrate the past, but to kind of move forward into the future, one that has served our community so well over time and will continue to do so for a long time, one that has shown in this project not just a commitment to historic preservation, but a real tangible commitment to this community, which I love so well, and so do they. To Unity Church Unitarian, in recognition of their leadership and completing a long-range master plan for the historic church to remain a community asset while incorporating sustainable and spiritual values into the design.
And we forgot to announce earlier that as you come forward to receive certificates, what we'd like to have you do is come to this side of the aisle, because you're being videotaped and photographed, and so this is the best spot to be shown off, and then you'll receive a certificate, and anybody who would like to speak to the project is invited to share a few words with us. So Barbara, maybe you'd like to say something also.
I'm Barbara Hubbard, the Executive Director at Unity Church Unitarian, and I'd like to say on behalf of the congregation, thank you so much, and thank you, Melvin, for the kind words and for this wonderful honor that you have bestowed upon us. We really do have a commitment to living out our values in the community, and one of our values is open, broad embrace, and to be a credible partner in our community. And the new entryway through the brilliance and the partnership of Miller Dunwoody Architecture has been a significant change in our facility. So thank you so very much.
Hi, I'm Robert Ferguson. I'm an HPC member, and I live on the west side, within walking distance of here, and just a couple of blocks from Mark Thomas and the Watson House. The 1886 Dwight Henderson Watson and Clara Merritt Watson House, with its shingle-style barn, was identified as an early project, probably initiated in 1885, of the young firm of Cass Gilbert and James Knox Taylor. Historian Paul Clifford Larson calls it one of the best surviving examples of Gilbert's restless imagination at work on small projects, while anxiously waiting for the monumental building commissions that he was confident would ultimately launch his career and assure his place in the pantheon of an American Renaissance. We all know how that turned out. The small scale and budget of the project did not keep him from utilizing a lively and varied combination of surface materials, designing trim profiles, inserting striking geometric elements in windows and elsewhere, and using planning devices such as the entry stairway that we might expect with a much larger floor plate. It is very much the work of a young man, but one who refused to draw down his artistic ambitions on smaller projects. Thanks to Paul Clifford Larson for that commentary, who is, as probably everybody here knows, a former member and former chair of this commission. Primary documentation, including working drawings, was secured from the Cass Gilbert Archive of the New York Historical Society. The cement asbestos siding was removed from the house. Altered openings were restored to their original configuration. Shingles and siding were restored. Lost trim details were ascertained from the plans and physical evidence, and the trim was recreated. The house and barn were painted in an historically appropriate color scheme. This loving restoration of an early Cass Gilbert house, and I stress that word restoration with close attention to the original architect's intent. This loving restoration of an early Cass Gilbert house, the only one on the west side, is impressive in and for itself. But possibly as important is its contribution to its neighborhood. On its corner site, the highly visible work has revealed a strong historic character that these streets had pretty nearly forgotten, and set an example for neighbors. On a broader scale, Dr. Thomas's research into the Watson family's extended community has provided a context for understanding the significance of many other related sites. Dr. Thomas's active teaching of this context in his walking tours must be considered a vital part of his ongoing stewardship of the living historic environment of St. Paul's West Side. This year's first stewardship award goes to Dr. Mark Shepard Thomas in recognition of his meticulous efforts to carefully restore and maintain the Dwight H. and Clara M. Watson house and barn at 402 Hall Avenue, designed by Cass Gilbert. Come on, Mark. And there's always more. And to John Earler, in recognition of his quality craftsmanship in carefully restoring the Dwight H. and Clara M. Watson house and barn. And to Cliff Carey, in recognition of his quality craftsmanship in carefully restoring the Dwight H. and Clara M. Watson house and barn. And although we don't have a fourth certificate prepared this evening, I'd also like to recognize Anders Christensen, whose treatment of the exterior brought out the distinguishing features of the house.
Well, thank you. Thank you to the commission, to Amy, to Christine, and to two people here whom I fondly refer to as my house's significant others. When we moved to St. Paul in 1992, we were looking for a house, and I worked over at Westside Health Center on the west side. And in order to find a place to live, I thought, if I have to drive to work, I will never survive as a physician. So that dictated our finding a house on the west side, and we found this house that looked like a box covered with asbestos. And it didn't give its secrets away all that easily. But I look upon this as an investigation that started when we bought the house, or actually when we found two screech owls roosting in trees on the property. But it's my mind is racing, so I hope you'll bear with me here. But the first thing that came to mind was I have to give thanks to some other people as well. One is Kurt Schwichtenberg, who in 1993 redid our bathroom. And he ran an organization called Urban Heritage at that point. And he was walking around the back of the house, and he said, "Boy, this reminds me of McKim, Mead, and White." And at the time, I didn't know who McKim, Mead, and White was. I didn't know anything about architecture, St. Paul history. But it was one of those little things that stuck in my head. And then I would also thank Lorraine Bush, who was one of the third owners of the house. And she had lovingly restored the inside, and she added to her credit, I used 33 gallons of paint stripper inside. But to her credit, she didn't change anything else. And she had an eye, and I'm grateful to her, and she's no longer living. The next person is Tom Blank, who showed up at our back door in 1998 in the late afternoon. And my partner was making dinner, and Tom had been to the New York Historical Society and found the name Watson House, St. Paul, the New York Historical Society files. And my partner came to the back door and heard this, and he said, "Nonsense. The contractor designed it as he went along." And I'm sorry, John, but that was a big mistake.
You were wrong, for once.
At any rate, it has been an investigation, and it started at the Minnesota Historical Society, where I found the picture of one of the Watsons. And this was George Watson, who was a member of the State Constitutional Convention. And that was like turning on a switch, and I just went wild. But many years later, and after John and Cliff came on board to help me with this, the house has become an organizing principle not only for historical research, architectural research, but also for figuring out what does history and community assets, what role do they play in directing our future as a neighborhood and as a community. And what I would like to do eventually is for this house to play a public role in the service of community-based asset research and directing community-based planning. So I tend to get tangled up in my words in front of an audience, But I would say that this house really provided me with a means of figuring out what is important in life. It's finding unmet needs, figuring out what needs to happen in order for those needs to be met, and then building a fabric, now there's a new word, a fabric of community by engaging people in bringing this about in the spirit of goodwill and trust. And that's where community organizing begins. And I would also say, I know I'm going on and I apologize, but I'm do this. But it represents community mental health in its finest aspect. And that's an area of research that I have pegged out for my next profession, perhaps. But anyway, I thank you all.
Well, good evening. I'm Ellen Bialis, and I am Council President Kathy Lantry's legislative aide. And Kathy was scheduled to be here tonight. Unfortunately, she had a good family friend whose parent passed away, and so she's with them this evening. And so, as I always say, I'm kind of a poor substitute, but I'm pinch hitting tonight, and so I'll try to do my best. I know I'm not quite as gregarious as she usually is at these, so we'll see if we can't get through it. But I'm very pleased tonight to be here to present our first professional award of the evening. The Frederick Reinecker House, number 2, at 700 East 3rd Street in the Dayton's Bluff Historic District, was built from 1883 to 1886 for just $2,500, which seems like a pretty good deal today, I think. It's a beautiful Queen Anne Victorian home, both artfully massed and delicately detailed. However, like many old structures in our neighborhood that are beautiful, it fell into disrepair. Steve Garretts, the current owner, purchased it for $1, also a very good deal, as part of a revitalization program. Tonight's HPC award recognizes its preservation and restoration. The most recent project entailed the repair of trim, siding, windows, and roof in alignment with the historic integrity of the house and neighborhood, full removal of existing paint, the selection of a new color palette, and the repainting of the entire house. Steve Garretts hired Luis Vinoli for his masterful painting craftsmanship. For over 20 years, Luis has contributed to the historic preservation of Victorian homes in Minnesota. His passion for the historic colors of this period and his painstaking efforts to express this passion make him worthy to receive this award tonight. And this house, I understand, has a particular meaning for Luis, which he kind of expressed in his own words as part of the process for deciding upon this award. He submitted some text, and I think it's really fitting because it really speaks to, I think, how so many people feel about preservation and their role in it. So these are Luis's words. I don't want to be remembered as someone who just painted this house, but rather as a good steward of the history and culture that this house represents. I have a relationship with it that goes beyond this most recent project. I was part of the crew that worked on it in 1990 with Neil Heidemann, who is now deceased, but whom many of us warmly remember as a master painter. Neil was my mentor in the art of painting Victorian homes. He taught me everything I know. He conveyed a strong sense of responsibility as someone who was a part of the history of the house and whose time had come to carry the torch and restore it to its original grandeur and true to the vision of the original owner. 20 years later, it became my turn. I too wanted to align myself with the vision of the original owner, but in a way that was new and refreshing. I believe that Neil would approve. So I'm very pleased tonight to present our first professional award to Luis Vinoli in recognition of his passion and commitment to the craft of painting the Victorian home at 700 East 3rd Street, respecting the original vision in a new and refreshing way.
my name is Luis Vignoli. I would like to, first of all, thank Bob Hengelfeld that always being with me in these projects. Stephen Garrett for your nomination. Cliff has been a long time friend. And all this wonderful group of workers that I met here in Minnesota. And I want to thank HPC for this award. This, for me, means that I did the right thing when I gave up my engineering degree 20 years ago to pursue my passion. And has been a wonderful journey, Colored People House, all these wonderful clients. And it's wonderful when people trust you with to create a palette that match their personality, that match their neighborhood, that can make everybody happy. So this to me shows that I'm on the right track to live in Minnesota, the state that I learned to love and work for a long time. So thank you very much.
Good evening. Oh boy, more people have come in than I saw when I first sat up in the front row. Unlike when I go to church, and I sit in the back when I go, which is the segue into talking about the Church of the Assumption. And I'm particularly pleased to be able to give this award because that was the first church that my wife and I attended when we moved here in 1974. And my political differences with the Archbishop aside, I'm really happy to be able to acknowledge what has become just a gem of downtown and of the city of St. Paul. The Church of the Assumption at 51 West 7th Street with its iconic twin towers is a landmark in downtown St. Paul. It was designed by architect Joseph Rydell and dedicated by the Diocese of Minnesota in 1874 and is thus the oldest existing church in the city of St. Paul. Rydell modeled it after German churches, although in a Romanesque style, keeping its Catholic German immigrant congregation in mind. Built of Plattsville limestone, its exterior and interior are largely unchanged from the original construction. Church of the Assumption was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1975. Now here's another one of my favorites here. Miller Dunwoody Architects has worked with the Church of the Assumption for almost 15 years in ongoing efforts to preserve this historic site. Starting in 1999, Miller Dunwoody prepared documents for exterior improvements on an ongoing basis as part of their investigative work because no original drawings were available. Details of modifications were often worked out in the field between the architect, the contractor, and the consultants. Basement spaces were renovated in 2001, the school building re-roofed in 2002, school doors replaced in 2005, and most recently, Miller Dunwoody oversaw the reconstruction of the limestone stairs at the east and west entries to the church in 2009, coordinated with lighting designer Schuler Schuck for site lighting of the entire church campus in 2010. Boy, this goes on and on. Prepared assessments for the old church chimney and rectory stairs in 2011 and subsequently oversaw reconstruction of those stairs last year. This is a work of love. Preservation work for Church of the Assumption was previously recognized by the St. Paul HPC in 2000, the year 2000, and by the Preservation Alliance of Minnesota in 2001. Tonight, we honor Church of the Assumption and Miller Dunwoody Architecture for their stewardship of this historic site. So, a stewardship award goes to the Church of the Assumption in recognition of their commitment and stewardship of the conservation of the Church of the Assumption and its campus, a St. Paul treasure, and to Miller Dunwoody Architecture Incorporated in recognition of their 15-year partnership in carefully planning and designing for the conservation of the Church of Assumption. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Julie Malika, who's the administrator at Assumption, was with us during the previous engagements out in the other hall. And she got a text message that Father Abbott had to be taken to the hospital, so she has left. She sent us a text message, and otherwise she was going to be here as well. This is a great honor. Assumption is a great client to work for. And as you can see from the litany of the projects we've worked on, it's been everything from redoing stairways to basements to the work on the exterior. And one of my enduring memories of my work in preservation will always be being in the bucket of the tower crane hanging 220 feet above 7th Street, looking at the twin spires and evaluating them while the Xcel Energy Center was under construction across the street. It was really something to behold and something I'll always treasure. Melissa Ekman's with me tonight. I'm here to take all the accolades for Miller Dunwoody. She does all the work. So thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Dan Bodstrom, and I represent Ward 6 in the St. Paul City Council. I'm really pleased to be here tonight. Just as an aside before we get started, it'll probably be mentioned later on anyway, but my associate and colleague Dave Thune used to refer to me as the Philistine when it came to historical preservation. Now, as I've gotten older, I appreciate the value of old things, particularly this old body. And as you know, Payne Avenue, Arcade Street really is the heart of the district that I represent, and it's been a struggle over there for the last several years. And things now are all finally coming together, and a lot of great things are beginning to happen. And it's setting the table, I think, is what we said we were doing for many, many years. And now the guests are beginning to arrive. And one of those guests are the reason that we are here this evening. Ward 6 Food and Drink at 858 Payne Avenue in the vibrant multi-ethnic East Side neighborhood represents the rehabilitation and reuse of a former bar built in 1885. I think I was around about the time they built that thing. It had been vacant for many years as earlier attempts at purchasing and restoring it failed. There were numerous setbacks along the way, including the loss of various building elements to theft. And I might add, I got involved in this thing several times as attempts were made to rehab it. And I think I lost confidence at the time that I was informed that somebody had bypassed the water meter. And I thought, you know, this is going a little bit too far. So when these fellows came along, it really, really was a welcome thing. Anyway, the previous owner had kept the structure from being torn down, which was a good thing. All it needed was a new owner with vision and deep pockets. Bob Parker had been looking for a site for a long time. As soon as he and his partner, Eric Foster, saw this building, they recognized its potential, both in terms of its age and charm, and the major impact it could have on the neighborhood. He hired project designer Smart Associates, who maintained the character of the building. They worked with Flannery Construction in attempting to reuse and recycle as much of the salvaged parts as possible. By adding necessary parking, the project could meet city zoning requirements as a bar and restaurant. Design and construction became a long process, but we see the fruits of their labors today. With elaborate ceiling tiles, decorative wood floor inlay, and massive oak bar and back bar, it's a warm and inviting watering hole, and good food also. Neighborhood reception has been tremendous, and as anticipated, renewed attention has been focused on Payne Avenue. A rehabilitation award goes to Ward 6 Food and Drink in recognition of their courage and commitment in rehabilitating a 1885 saloon at 858 Payne Avenue into the fine Ward 6 restaurant establishment. To Smart Associates in recognition of their sensitive design in rehabilitating an 1885 saloon at 858 Payne Avenue, and Finally, to Flannery Construction in recognition of their quality craftsmanship in rehabilitating the 1885 saloon at 858 Payne Avenue. Congratulations. Bob and Eric, come on up here. Thank you. Okay, you guys, somebody's going to be the spokesman for this organization. Are you going to do it? Eric? Okay, you bet.
It was a long process to make this happen, and we needed a lot of help along the way. I think that, saving old buildings, especially when you're doing sensitive things, creating a food service establishment, not something that there's a lot of leeway on in terms of city requirements and things, and then adding a full liquor license to it, again, a little bit tricky. So we were very lucky to have Councilmember Bostrom supporting us from the beginning, and also Bob and I both live in Dayton's Bluff, and Councilmember Lantry was, I eventually started referring to her as our fairy godmother, because whenever we would hit what seemed like an insurmountable roadblock, we would call her up and magically things would start to get nudged along. And Cecile Bador was also very helpful at various points in the project. And Bob and I were fortunate enough to have some connections with Jim Smart and Jerry Flannery. And they were amazing in making this thing happen. And I would encourage all of you to head over after this is over for some for a cocktail or a nice snack. So thanks very much.
I think all of you who are design professionals in this room, and there are a lot of you, I think you know that your work is really only as good as your clients, and I couldn't have possibly asked for better. I'm delighted to be a part of what apparently is a renaissance for this really wonderful part of town, and thrilled to eat there as often as I can.
And it's true, the food is really good.
Good evening. My name is Richard Dana, and I'm a member of the St. Paul Heritage Preservation Commission, and also have dabbled in remodeling and restoration in the city of St. Paul. A little more than 20 years ago, a single young house painter found out about a property on Fairmont, right at the corner by St. Albans, that was more than a distressed property. It was the first time I'd ever heard that term garbage house applied to a property. Nestled in that neighborhood in Crocus Hill, it was a considerable blighting influence. It was about the only thing anyone could see to do was to tear it down and then be left with a site that was going to be very difficult to fill appropriately. Bob Hengelfeld learned that it in fact was a Cass Gilbert house and one of Gilbert's early efforts. It sat on a prominent lot. It needed to be brought back into service. Bob, with his family's help, bought the house, did the work themselves, and a little more than a year later, after Bob had gotten married and put everything he had into the house, the restored gem was back on the market and ready for a new owner. Bob was hooked. He had a new career. He got his contractor's license. He got hired by numerous homeowners to do restoration on their homes, several of which have received their own awards and recognition. He started his own millwork shop, which was utilized by other remodeling contractors who needed his expertise to get their jobs right. But he didn't stop coming across those particular properties that were slipping through the cracks. They were vacant or foreclosed or had been trashed. They were just being neglected. He knew that they could be brought back to more than just utility. They could be renovated and restored to reflect the assets they once were in the neighborhoods, and they could be desirable homes again. I call it flipping with a conscience. The difference that I see is that Bob actually bought these properties, decided what needed to be done, did the design work himself, and with the help of his family and others, did the work and then found new owners. He's done this several times. Most recently, at a house at 748 Ashland, one of the things about people who buy houses and then fix them up is that, that's this house, they get caught up in the stories. This house actually was built a block away on what's now the Linwood School, whatever Linwood School is now called, tennis court site, and that was called Hennepin Avenue in St. Paul at that time. The house got moved to this new address. It had a new life that way. It fell into disrepair, was purchased by somebody else who attempted to rehab it and ran out of money, and then it was foreclosed on and looked like it probably wasn't going to have another life. Bob bought it and did this work. A lot of the millwork that he created himself is demonstrated in these photos. And that's what he's continued to do for more than 20 years in his career. I don't want to underestimate the significance of Bob's family having been involved in these projects. They played a big part. But for Bob's commitment to historic preservation, for his high standards of accuracy and craftsmanship, for his willingness to be the one to take the risk, I'm proud to present this award to Bob Hengelfeld. So that the second professional award of the evening goes to Bob Hengelfeld in recognition of his longtime commitment to rescuing distressed historic homes in St. Paul and restoring them with high-quality craftsmanship. Congratulations, Bob.
Thanks, Richard. When you told me I'd be receiving an award, my first response was it seemed a little early in my career. and then he reminded me that it's been 20 years since we first met on that fateful day over at 680 Fairmont, and a lot of water under the bridge since then. So I guess I just want to thank Richard. I want to thank HPC for supporting me all these years, and some of my crazy ideas and decisions, and the AA, and of course my family, who have been really an integral part of this, especially in the early days. And I wanted to give recognition to my brother. It doesn't seem to be here tonight, but he's kind of been, at one point somebody said he's kind of the backbone of the organization. He's been he's the guy who produces a lot of the beautiful millwork that you see. So thank you.
Good evening. My name is Cecile Bedore. I'm the Director of Planning and Economic Development for the City of St. Paul. And last but not least, I'd like to present the award for adaptive reuse to C&E Lofts. Designed by architect Walter Robert Wilson, the Chittenden and Eastman Building at 2410 University Avenue in the University Raymond Commercial Historic District has been a landmark in the Midway area since its construction in 1917. The front facade, which features distinctive organic motifs, reflects the influence of Chicago architect Louis Sullivan. The building was erected as a furniture showroom and warehouse. It consists of two sections, the main structure, which rises 6 stories above a high basement, and a 2-story extension to the rear, which served as a shipping and garage space. The front facade displays a classical base shaft capital design. The 2-story base features an ornate central entry flanked by broad display windows. Modern windows had replaced the original Chicago-style windows at this level, as well as the double-hung ribbon windows above. A series of signs had been painted over the years on the sides and the penthouse of the building. Now known as the C&E Lofts, the 137,000 square foot building has been converted from an underutilized property into a building with 104 dwelling units with occupancy rates well over 90% in just 4 months. I think that's great. Apartments feature open plan loft style design with highlight concrete floors and exposed timber columns and wood ceilings. Receiving state and federal historic tax credits, the architect, developer, and historic consultant worked closely with the St. Paul Heritage Preservation Commission staff and board, as well as the State Historic Preservation Office and the National Park Service, to carefully interpret the existing historic fabric. This was especially true in the replacement of the windows and spandrel panels, and in the new signage, which draws its inspiration from vintage sign painting. With its reopening, the C&E Lofts have recaptured its place as the pinnacle and icon of the University Raymond District. So the Adaptive Reuse Award goes to Exeter Realty in recognition of their vision and commitment to adaptive reuse of the Chittenden and Eastman building as lofts at 2410 University Avenue, and to McRosty Historic Advisors in recognition of their research of this Chittenden and Eastman building that ensured a sensitive rehabilitation into lofts, and to BKV Group in recognition of their thoughtful design for adaptive reuse of the Chittenden and Eastman building into artist lofts, and to Frana Companies, Inc. in recognition of their skillful craftsmanship in rehabilitating the Chittenden and Eastman building into artist lofts, and finally to RLK Incorporated in recognition of their evaluation and respectful design solutions in rehabilitating the Chittenden and Eastman building. Congratulations.
Great, thanks, Cecile. My name's Tom Nelson, and I represent Exeter Realty, the developer, and it's really an honor to receive this award tonight. And in a lot of ways, I feel like we should be sharing it with so many people in this room. I've heard themes of setting the table, getting things ready to be reused and adapted for the community, and in this case, so many people set the table for us, beginning with anyone who had anything to do with the Central Corridor Light Rail Line, the PED at the City of St. Paul, the HPC at the City of St. Paul for creating the University and Raymond Historic District. Amy Spong, I don't know where you are out there. Thank you. Donna Drummond and your colleagues for establishing all of the rezoning work you did along that district. Everyone at the Preservation Alliance of Minnesota to lobby for the state historic rehabilitation tax credit, which quite frankly is why we were able to be at the dance and to execute this terrific project. So we're happy to receive this. I hope we're able to share some of it back with this terrific project, the residents of St. Anthony Park, the residents of our building, and all of you. And I want to note that we are back to try to do this again. We do have the downtown St. Paul Post Office under contract on Kellogg Boulevard. We're in due diligence, but I hope to be here in a couple of years getting the same award for the same thing. Thank you.
What wonderful projects are happening in St. Paul. This was so exciting tonight to see everyone and these great projects that are happening. So let's give everyone one last round of applause. And Thanks to all the presenters tonight, too, that were able to tell us the stories about these great projects. And thank you to the HPC for putting on such a great event that's kicking off Preservation Month here in May. So I have to put a shameless plug in. Preservation Alliance of Minnesota is having their anti-wrecking ball on May 17th at the Soap Factory in Minneapolis. So come on down to keep celebrating Preservation Month. But thank you all for coming tonight. It's been a really fantastic event.